Hello and a very warm welcome to the Analyst dated 1st February 2026, brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be covering the 7 set of current affairs issues which are featured in today's newspaper. And the handout of this very discussion has been pinned in the comment section below for your future reference. Beginning with the analysis section, in the first topic, as from this financial year, the government would be using debt to GDP ratio as its fiscal anchor. So in this particular respect, we'll try and understand that why the shift was needed from using the annual fiscal deficit targets to the debt to GDP ratio and what all challenges the government is facing when it comes to fiscal consolidation. Moving on to the second topic, as recently in New Delhi itself, the second India-Arab League nations meeting was organized. So in this particular respect, we'll try and understand that what are these Arab League nations and what are the key areas of cooperation between India and the Arab League members. Moving on, in the prelim booster section, we will be covering the 5 set of topics which would be very relevant for your upcoming prelims examination. So stay tuned. Now, beginning with the first topic, which is dealing with India's fiscal sustainability. This particular topic you can directly associate with GS paper 3, government budgeting. Now, why are we discussing this particular issue today? Because in today's budget itself, the government would be giving us a proper roadmap that how we are going to make a transition from annual fiscal deficit as a fiscal anchor to debt to GDP ratio as a fiscal anchor. Because previously it said, the government has stated that from this financial year 26-27, we'll start using debt to GDP ratio as a fiscal anchor. Now, the first thing that you need to understand is what is fiscal deficit? This has already been taught to you previously. Now, when it comes to fiscal deficit, it is basically your total expenditure minus the total receipt. But when I say receipt, you are not going to include the borrowings. So, this is your fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit basically gives us an idea that in this particular financial year, what was the borrowing done by the government. Now, coming to debt to GDP ratio, what is this? When I say debt, it basically refers to government's borrowing and its repayment obligation. And when I say GDP, is it real GDP or nominal GDP? So, it is your nominal GDP. Okay. Now, government has set this goal that we will be bringing the debt to GDP ratio to around 50% plus minus 1 by March 2031. And this is the reason from this year, since we are going to start using this as a fiscal anchor. So, in today's budget itself, the government would be giving us a roadmap that how we are going to meet this particular goal. Okay, how this transition would happen. And why the government has actually decided this particular thing that we'll use debt to GDP ratio as a fiscal anchor? Because it was recommended by the N.K. Singh committee that we should do this. And according to N.K. Singh committee, the combined debt to GDP ratio should be 60%. Combined means the debt to GDP ratio of central government plus the state government. And if you split that, 40% limit was for central government and 20% limit was for state government. Okay, so we are actually following the recommendation given by the N.K. Singh committee in this respect. And you will be happy to know this, that post-COVID, we have been able to reduce the combined debt to GDP ratio by approximately 7%. This was highlighted by this year economic survey itself. As you can see in this picture also, the combined public debt as a percentage of GDP was around 89%. Because after the COVID, the government has to increase the expenditure. That led to increase in the debt of the government. But over a period of time, we have been able to reduce it by 7%. Now, let's understand that why there was a need to make a shift towards the debt to GDP ratio and do away with the annual rigid fiscal deficit targets. First and foremost reason is, if you look across globally, this is the best practice which is followed by majority of the countries. Why? Let's understand this. When I say fiscal deficit, under the FRBM Act, it has been stated that you will be provided with the annual fiscal deficit target, and it is quite rigid. Now, it could happen that in a particular year, we might be stuck with a disaster, for example, in COVID-19 pandemic. The government has to increase its expenditure in order to rebound the economy. But here in the FRBM Act, when it comes to the fiscal deficit, we are giving you annual targets. So, it somewhere reduces the ability of the government to intervene in the economy. But when I talk about the debt to GDP ratio, it is giving you that flexibility that, okay, within this 5 years or maybe 10 years, I have to reduce my debt to GDP ratio from this percent to this percent. So this is giving me flexibility. It could happen that in one particular year, if the government, due to some unforeseen circumstances, it has to increase the expenditure, then it can manage its debt. How? By because of this increase in expenditure, this would give a boost to GDP. And another benefit would be that here we have the flexibility. So in the next year, the government would be increasing the tax rate, and that's how it would be able to mobilize more tax revenue and it would be able to repay the debt. Okay. So when it comes to this debt to GDP ratio, it provides the necessary fiscal muscle to the government that it can intervene in the economy and it can respond effectively to economic shock. Example, COVID-19 pandemic. Then this is the metric which is actually being gauged by the credit rating agencies. For example, Standard & Poor, Moody, Fitch, etc. And by looking this downward trend when it comes to public debt as a percentage of GDP, I am talking with respect to combined public debt to GDP as a percentage, Standard & Poor has actually improved our credit rating from BB minus to BB. Okay, so this is another reason why we should be more focused towards debt to GDP ratio and not towards the annual fiscal deficit targets. Then another major reason being that it is more reliable measure of the fiscal performance. Why? Because when it comes to fiscal deficit, it is giving you this particular year target. But when it comes to debt, it is cumulative in nature. When it comes to the borrowing done by the government in year 1 plus year 2 plus year 3, this would give me a cumulative figure of the debt. But that is not with respect to fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is only telling me that what all amount of borrowing the government has done because there was a mismatch between the expenditure and the receipt, except the borrowing. Fine. So that is the reason it is considered to be a reliable measure of the fiscal performance. Then it would enable us to improve fiscal transparency, particularly because it would enable you to effectively gauge the off-budget borrowing. Let's understand this concept. When it comes to off-budget borrowing, what the government would be doing, it would tell one of its government agency that you borrow the money on our behalf. Now, since a government agency is borrowing that money, that does not get reflected in the budget. And that is the reason the Comptroller Auditor General of India has time and again pointed out that this is not good. This is not enabling us to get the transparent figures when it comes to the fiscal performance of the government. Since it is not shown in the budget, ultimately it does not get accounted into the fiscal deficit. So despite the government doing a lot of off-budget borrowing, the fiscal deficit target, we are saying that no, we are meeting the fiscal deficit target. But it is not giving us a true picture of the fiscal performance of the government. Okay, so that is the reason it is all the more important that we start using the debt to GDP ratio. Because if in a scenario, if that government agency is unable to repay that borrowing, ultimately that repayment obligation would come on the government. And in the initial slide itself, I told you when I say debt, it basically refers to the government borrowing and the repayment obligations. Okay, so debt to GDP ratio would enable us to effectively gauge this off-budget borrowing as well. And hence it would enable us to improve the transparency when it comes to getting the true picture of the fiscal performance of the government. Then another benefit is when it comes to the government, previously the government has stated that we will be following a sustainable trajectory in a transparent manner. Now, since because of this debt to GDP ratio, you are able to get a transparent picture of the fiscal performance of the government. So it somewhere puts the pressure on the government that it reduces the debt. Okay, so to reduce that and to do that in a sustainable manner, the government has previously it has stated, this is not something which was outlined in today's budget. Let's see what the finance minister has to say on this particular subject. So previously the government has stated that we will be having mild, moderate and high degree scenario depending upon what is the nominal growth rate of the GDP. Okay, so if the growth rate is high, in that case, if the government follow the high degree, that means it is focusing more on reducing the debt, then in that case, it would be able to manage its debt in a sustainable manner. But the problem with this particular ratio is it ignores the debt composition. it does not tell you, as I told you, it is a cumulative figure. It does not tell you that how much of the borrowing you have done from domestic market and how much is external debt. That could be problematic, because if the debt is more of external nature, then if there is exchange rate volatility, it could, be problematic in the long run. Whether the debt is short term or a long term debt, and whether that debt or that borrowing has been done on a fixed exchange rate or on a floating exchange rate, or on the fixed interest rate, okay? And if the borrowing has been done on a fixed interest rate, then in that case, it is fine. But if that borrowing has been done on a floating interest rate, then if the interest rate increases in the market, then the debt would also increase. So that is not actually being told to us. Then the experts have pointed out that this transition would take us more time to actually meet the target which was given by the N.K. Singh committee when it comes to FRBM Act, that when it comes to central government, it should be 40% of our GDP. Just look at this scenario. I told you that the government has provided us different trajectory. So we are assuming that the GDP is growing at a rate of 11%. Even in the high case scenario, you see, the government would be able to reduce its debt as a percentage of GDP to around 47% approximately. It is far high as compared to the target that we have listed under the FRBM Act. So that is the reason the experts have raised this concern that it would take us a long transition period to actually meet the target that we have listed down for us in the FRBM Act. So that is another problem. Then another concern is, if the government is unable to reduce its debt, that means the government is doing a lot of borrowing from the market. And if the government is taking away all the corpus which is there with the banks, ultimately the private sector is left with less amounts of funds. So they would be forced to borrow from abroad, or in the worst case scenario, it could happen that the private investment could go down. Okay, so these are the issues when we use the debt to GDP ratio as a fiscal anchor. Now let's try and understand that what all achievements that we have done when it comes to fiscal consolidation as highlighted by this year economic survey itself. Now if you can see clearly in this particular image that as highlighted by the economic survey, we have been able to reduce our fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP, and at the same time we are able to reduce the primary deficit as a percentage of GDP. How do you get the primary deficit? From fiscal deficit, you deduct the interest payments, and that's how you get the primary deficit. Now you can see that both the deficit, we are managing it very well. Primary deficit is around 0.8% of the GDP and fiscal deficit 4.4%. It is anticipated that it would fall down to 4.4%. Currently it is 4.8. Okay. This is the estimated figure and this is the real figure that we have. So in 2025, it was 4.8% of the GDP. And this is the reason, since we are effectively managing our debt to GDP ratio, the different rating agencies have improved our rating. And when the credit rating agencies actually improve the rating, what does it lead to? Just understand this with the help of a simple example. Let's suppose you have two friends, A and B. You know that this A friend has borrowed a lot of money and he already have a lot of debt obligation. He comes to you and he asks you that you just lend him 1 lakh rupee. I know majority of you would be laughing because right now you don't have this much amount of money, but just imagine this thing. Okay, now you know that this friend of yours has already taken a lot of debt from a lot of people. So if you give this money to this person A, there is very little chance that you will be able to get this money back. Okay, but let's suppose you are a very money-minded person and you want to make profit out of this particular settlement. So what you will do? You will say that, okay, I'll give you the money, but you have to give me a very high interest on this. The another case scenario, another friend of yours is B. He has a very good repayment, history, and currently he does not own a lot of debt from other friends of yours. So he comes to you, you will be ready to give him this particular money, 1 lakh at a lower interest rate. So this is what happening when a country's rating improves. When the country rating improves, it becomes easier for the government to borrow from the market at an affordable interest rate. Okay. And this has been possible because we are effectively managing the fiscal deficit, primary deficit as well as debt to GDP ratio. Now, another good achievement is that we have been able to improve our revenue buoyancy. I have seen students getting confused between the tax buoyancy and tax elasticity. Just wait, you will get the clarity. When it comes to tax buoyancy, it basically refers to that if your GDP is increasing by 1%, okay, this is GDP, how much is the increase in your tax revenue? So it basically tells me that what is the responsiveness of the tax revenue given the increase in GDP. Okay, so as you can see here that we have been able to improve the tax buoyancy. So it has increased from 10.8% in the time before pandemic. Now it has increased to 11.5%. Now when it comes to the tax elasticity, what is tax elasticity? It basically tells me that if I change the tax rate, okay, if I change the tax rate, then in that case, what would be the resultant change in the tax revenue? Tax buoyancy has to do with the GDP. Tax elasticity has to do with changes in tax rate. For example, if I reduce the corporate tax rate, then in that case, what would be the resultant change in the tax revenue? So this is buoyancy and elasticity. I hope next time you will not get confused. Now, when I talked about tax buoyancy, why did not talk about this revenue receipt as a percentage of GDP? Because revenue receipt has two elements, tax revenue also as well as non-tax revenue. Okay, so when I talk about tax buoyancy, it basically refers to this, tax revenue as a percentage of GDP. And when it comes to the people who are filing the income tax returns, as you can see, it has increased from almost 7 crore to around more than 9 crore people. And one more good thing has happened is that when you look at the tax revenue raised by the government, so we have two kinds of tax, direct tax, indirect tax, and we know that when it comes to direct tax, it is more progressive in nature, as in when your income increases, you are bound to pay more amount of tax. But when it comes to indirect tax, it is regressive in nature. The same person has to pay the same amount of GST if you are buying a Parle-G biscuit. Does not matter whether that Parle-G biscuit is bought by Virat Kohli or me or a very poor person. Okay, so as a percentage of income, that poor person is giving more in form of GST when it comes to Parle-G. Okay, so what has happened? We have been able to improve this as well. Before, what used to happen before the pandemic? We used to get 48% of the gross tax revenue from indirect taxes and 52% from the direct taxes. So more or less they were almost equal. But we have improved the scenario now. Now 59% of the gross tax revenue is actually we are getting from the direct taxes, and merely 41% we are getting from the indirect taxes. Okay, this ensures that our taxation system is becoming more and more progressive in nature. And why this has been possible? Because we have taken various administrative and tax related reforms. We are doing faceless assessment. We have introduced the Vivad Se Vishwas scheme, which is enabling the government to unlock the disputed tax amount. Okay, then what we are doing to address the tax evasion, we have come up with the principal purpose test, so that only the genuine foreign investors are able to get the benefit of double taxation avoidance agreement. Okay, and it is also because our GDP is growing very well. So if your GDP grows well, the tax buoyancy is better. Then we have introduced GST 2.0 reforms. This is going to give further thrust to your GDP. And this would enable us to ensure that we follow the fiscal consolidation roadmap. Now, when it comes to GST 2.0, earlier we had 4 tax slab. Now we have reduced them to only 2 tax slab, 18% and 5%, and 40% we have for sin and luxury goods. Now, according to the government, since we have reduced the tax slab, it is going to give a push to the consumption. And how this consumption is going to increase the GDP? Because when you look at this year economic survey, it tells us that more than 60% of our GDP is basically your final consumption expenditure. So if your consumption increases, your GDP increases. And that is the reason we say that India is a consumption-led economy. Okay, so through GST 2.0 reform, we are going to give a boost to consumption, and that way it would help us to improve the GDP and ultimately debt to GDP ratio also. Then it is going to give boost to manufacturing sector also. Okay, because when the tax go down, the prices goes down, and this improves the price competitiveness in the external markets. So when you will be able to export more, again this would increase the GDP, and if the GDP increases, tax buoyancy is better, the government is able to mobilize more and more tax, and that's how it is able to reduce its debt. Then we have brought in the structural reforms. The government has stated that we have resolved the inverted duty structure. For this, you need to understand what is inverted duty structure. So under GST, what happens is the buyer will be paying the GST to the seller, and seller would be collecting the GST. Now what happens, let's suppose in case of fertilizer company, a fertilizer company is giving more amount in form of tax. Let's suppose it is giving 1000 rupees, in simplified way we are trying to understand, it is giving 1000 rupees as input tax, okay, but when it comes to the GST that it is able to collect from the farmers, it is merely rupees 600. I told you, farmer, since it is a buyer, he would be paying the GST to fertilizer, and in this case, when the fertilizer company is getting some input, this fertilizer company is supposed to pay the GST. Now, if you see, the fertilizer company is facing a difference of rupees 400. Now, this 400 has to be paid by the government. So, if there is a delay from the government when it comes to releasing this 400 rupees, this is going to severely impact the working capital of this fertilizer company, and that ways it would not be able to increase its production to a large scale. Okay, so inverted duty structure in simple format is when you are paying more amount of tax for inputs as compared to the tax that you are able to collect from the buyer, okay, when you are selling the output. So the government has stated that we are trying to address this particular thing. So if this inverted tax duty structure is addressed, ultimately the working capital issues would be resolved, the companies would be able to expand their business. Business expand, GDP expand, government is able to mobilize more tax revenue, and ultimately it would be able to bring the debt to a sustainable level. These are the good things, but there are still a lot of problems when it comes to fiscal consolidation when it comes to government. First and the prominent problem is your tax base. Now, right now we studied that when it comes to the number of people who are filing the tax return, okay, it has increased from almost 6.9 crore to more than 9 crore. But you need to understand that this is not the true picture. All these 9.2 crore people are actually not paying tax money to the government. Out of them, majority of them are actually filing zero tax returns. What is the zero tax return? Let's suppose when I get the income from Vajiram, they deduct some tax amount, okay, and that tax amount goes to the government. But at the end of the financial year, I will be filing my income tax return, and if my income is less than the exemption limit, then I will be getting that entire tax money returned, refunded. So ultimately, I am not paying any tax to the government. So that is the reason, by just looking at the number of people filing the income tax return, you cannot say that the tax base has widened. Majority of them are actually filing zero tax return. They are not paying any tax to the government. Then another problem is the informal economy. According to Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, if you go by their data of financial year 2022-23, this informal economy contributes around 45% to the GDP. And more than 80% of our workforce is actually employed in the informal economy. When it comes to government, it becomes very difficult for the government to figure out that what is the actual income earned by the people working in informal sector. So that again reduces our tax base. Another problem is the various kind of exemptions given by the government to agriculture sector. Because of the lack of land records, we are not able to effectively assess what is the true income of the farmers, and also because of there is why very high price fluctuations when it comes to agriculture goods. So because of the various exemptions provided by the government, the tax base is very less. Similar is the scenario when it comes to the MSMEs. Government is providing a lot of tax incentives to the MSMEs, which is actually leading to the problem of phenomena of missing middle. And this is actually reducing the tax base of the government as well. And that is the reason, if you combine the tax to GDP ratio of the central government plus the state government, it is roughly around 18% of the GDP, which is quite less as compared to the OECD countries, wherein the tax to GDP ratio is roughly more than 30%. So that ways it becomes difficult for the government to mobilize more and more tax revenue, and it becomes difficult for the government to actually manage the debt or the borrowing that it has done. Then there is poor tax collection efficiency. It is because of the tax evasion practices which the multinational corporations actually do, that is base erosion and profit shifting. Various ways it is done, TT shopping, round tripping, etc. So because of this, there is poor tax collection efficiency. And if you go by the property tax collection which is done in India, it is merely roughly 0.2% of our GDP. It is on account of lack of land records. And when you look at the OECD countries, therein the property tax actually is more than 1% of their GDP. This is the data given by the World Bank itself. So that is another problem. So the first two problems are basically related to the issues related to tax mobilization. The government is not able to get more amount of tax. Then another problem is with respect to the expenditure. Because in order to ensure fiscal consolidation, there are two ways. You increase the tax revenue, and what you have to do is you have to reduce your expenditure. But the problem is when it comes to the state government or when it comes to the central government, they have a lot of committed expenditure. Committed expenditure is one which the government has to make anyway. It cannot run away from that expenditure. The expenditure done to meet the administrative expenses, salaries, pension, etc. And once the 8th Pay Commission recommendations would be implemented, okay, once it is out and once it is implemented, it is going to increase the committed expenditure when it comes to the central government. When it comes to states, therein what we are seeing is Punjab and Rajasthan, these states have actually shifted from new pension scheme to old pension scheme. In old pension scheme, the entire pension burden is borne by the government itself. But in new pension scheme, the employees as well as the state government, they used to contribute. Okay. Now since they have moved towards again to the old pension scheme, this increases their committed expenditure. And because of these reasons and because of various exemptions, as you can see that in case of Punjab, their debt has increased to around 46% of their gross state domestic product, and that is the reason when it comes to Punjab, it got the lowest rank when it comes to fiscal health index. You need to let me know in the comment section that this index is released by which entity. Okay, on this in 2025 UPSC has already asked a question. Now when it comes to fiscal federalism, there are a lot of issues. We have brought in the GST that has taken away the ability of the state government to decide the tax rates, okay, somehow. And at the other end, what is happening is when it comes to the share of the central divisible tax pool which the states are supposed to get based on the recommendation of the Finance Commission, because of increased reliance on cess and surcharge, what is actually happening is the states are at the end of the day getting less of the divisible tax pool. So Finance Commission has mandated 41% devolution, but because of increased reliance on cess and surcharge, ultimately the states are actually getting effectively 33% only. Okay, because the central government is under no obligation to share the proceeds which it is able to get from cess and surcharge. Then there is capex consumption trade-off. Now the government is more worried towards the capex consumption. As you can see here, when it comes to the capital expenditure, this is also one good development. When it comes to the effective capital expenditure is basically the grant in aids provided by the central government to the states, which the states are actually using for capital creation, and the capital expenditure done by the central government itself. If you combine them, you get the effective capital expenditure. As you can see, it is increasing. So as you can see, when it comes to the effective capital expenditure, it is improving. So it has improved from 2.6% as a percentage of GDP in financial year 2020 to around 4% in financial year 25. Okay, so in this respect also we are doing good. Why increasing the capital expenditure is considered good? Because when you create the infrastructure, it actually incentivizes the private sector also to come forward, do the investment. That's how it leads to multiplier effect. It increases the GDP, and when the GDP increases, it becomes easier for the government to mobilize the taxes. Okay, so that enhances the debt sustainability. But the problem is the government, if it becomes more focused towards capital expenditure, we try to reduce the revenue expenditure, but that is not good. As you can see, when it comes to revenue expenditure, you also have grant in aids. It is a part of the revenue expenditure itself. So we should not reduce this. And plus, another problem being, if you reduce the revenue expenditure to a great extent, ultimately the lower section, the poor section of the Indian society, they will not be able to get the money, and this is going to negatively impact the consumption element of the GDP, and consumption actually accounts for 60% of our GDP. So that is again would be problematic. So we need to strike a balance between the two. Then when it comes to borrowing, the government are supposed to follow the golden fiscal rule. What is this golden fiscal rule? Whatever borrowing you are doing, that money should be used for capital expenditure. Okay. When it comes to this particular point, I am telling with respect to the revenue the government is able to generate. From that, majority of the shares should not go to revenue expenditure, but there should be a balance. But when it comes to the borrowed money, that should be used for capital creation. Okay. That ways the government would be able to improve its debt sustainability. Then there is poor adoption of outcome budgeting. What is outcome budgeting? Wherein you link the outlay, budgetary outlay, with the output, with the outcome. Outlay, let's suppose 10 crore was allocated for school creation. Output could be we have to create 100 schools. And outcome would be something intangible. That could be increase in gross enrollment ratio or improving the learning poverty. Okay. So very few states like Jharkhand and Karnataka, they have adopted the outcome budgeting. Other states also needs to adopt this, and this is applicable when it comes to central government also. It should effectively adopt this outcome budgeting so that we are able to ensure value for money. Now going forward, what needs to be done? So first and foremost, we need to rationalize the subsidies that we have. So we need to have a sunset clause. When it comes to the subsidies provided by the government to MSMEs, the reform that we can do herein, that the subsidies should be provided to the infant firms, not to draft firms. That would address the problem of phenomenon of missing middle as well. And we need to rationalize the subsidies given with respect to agriculture sector as well. Then we can come up with the performance link fiscal devolution when it comes to states. If they are performing good, if they are able to reduce their off budget borrowing, then in that case they should get higher amount of devolution from the central government. This would give a boost to the competitive federalism as well. Then for ensuring that the states or the central government is effectively able to follow the fiscal consolidation roadmap, we should set up a independent and expert body, that is Fiscal Council. Okay, this would ensure that whatever money we are spending, it is done effectively, and we are able to ensure that we adhere to the FRBM targets. Then we need to implement the outcome budgeting to ensure value for money. And we need to adhere to golden fiscal rule. That means whatever borrowing you are doing, that should be used for capital expenditure. That would help us improve the debt sustainability. That's all that we need to know with respect to this particular topic. I have framed a practice question for you people. So do practice this based on whatever we have discussed. Let's move on to the next topic. Now, recently, New Delhi hosted the second India-Arab Foreign Ministers meeting, wherein we had the foreign ministers from 22 Arab League members. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 2, India and its neighborhood relations. Now let's first understand what is this Arab League. So Arab League is basically a regional intergovernmental organization which currently has 22 member states, and it basically have the members from Middle East and North America, as you can see here also. The founding members were 7: Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria and Yemen, and these are the other members which joined later on. Officially it is known as League of Arab States, and it was established way back in 1945. And the goal is, as normally we have in case of intergovernmental organization, that is to foster political, economic, cultural cooperation while safeguarding the sovereignty of the member states. And it is headquartered in Egypt. And when it comes to India, we have an observer status. Now, coming to the areas of cooperation. Now, why these Arab League nations are important for India? Because of the strategic consideration. India has signed strategic partnership agreement with Oman, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Qatar over the past 2 decades, okay, which strengthen the strong political and economic relation between these countries. Then if you talk in terms of economy, then when it comes to the bilateral trade which is taking place between India and Arab League nations, it is exceeding $240 billion. Which makes this region one of the India's largest trading partners. We are not talking with respect to one country, we are talking about the entire 22 members. Then India has signed comprehensive economic partnership agreement with the UAE and Oman to deepen the economic integration. Then when you talk about the investment commitment also, we are getting a lot of investment from countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, primarily in the infrastructure sector. Then when you talk about the connectivity, so we have the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, which was launched when the G20 summit was held in 2023. This is going to give a boost to regional connectivity. Then when you talk about the energy security, these member countries actually supply nearly 60% of India's crude oil imports and around 70% of the natural gas imports. So this is the relevance of these particular nations. When it comes to India, we have signed a long-term LNG agreement with Qatar way back in 2024 to ensure energy security for the next 2 decades. Then when it comes to UAE, it is ready to participate in India's strategic petroleum reserves, which would help India to strengthen India's energy resilience. We are building these reserves so that if we don't get the supply of crude oil, then also we have adequate amount of oil reserves. Okay, so that's ways we are able to ensure energy security. Then these countries and India, they are collaborating in new areas. Okay, for example, in digital public infrastructure and fintech. So Rupee card has already been launched in UAE way back in 2019. And rupee is currently being accepted as the legal currency at the Dubai airport since 2023. Then when you talk about India and UAE, this is something that I discussed in the previous analyst itself, that they have the rupee dirham settlement system. That means if the UAE and India, they are doing trade, then they can repay the other country in the local currency. They don't need to depend upon dollar for that matter. This is one step towards de-dollarization as well, and towards internationalization of rupee also. Then India's UPI is already accepted for financial transaction in countries like Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and it is likely to grow further in the Arab League nations. Then when it comes to the defense domain, therein we have defense partnership with countries like Oman, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Qatar. We are basically focusing upon ensuring maritime security, counter-terrorism efforts, and since India also have access to Dugam port in Oman, this helps India to enhance its naval presence in the, this region. Now, when it comes to these particular countries, what are the challenges that we are facing? Now, when it comes to the countries which are a part of these Arab League nations, they usually have political instability. Different countries are governed by different government structure. Some are democratic, some are parliamentary republic, some are monarchy. Okay, so it becomes very difficult to develop a consensus with these countries. Because of the political instability, we also have terrorism related threats. Then because of the Houthi rebels attack in the Red Sea, that is increasing the India's shipping cost. And because of the Israel-Palestine war which is going on, previously this India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor was supposed to pass through Gaza Strip, but because of the security tensions there, we have now decided, the countries have decided now that we would ensure that the Gaza Strip is bypassed. So because of the security scenario that we have in these particular nations, it becomes very difficult to ensure effective coordination and negotiation with these particular countries. Basically, consensus building is a problem. For this, what we need to do, we need to constantly engage with them. Like for example, this was the second meeting that we had with the Arab League nations. So constantly like this, we should have meeting and we should strengthen the bilateral relation also with these particular countries. Okay, because they are very important from energy security point of view. Then we should try to come forward and we should play a role when it comes to resolving the regional disputes which are going on. But at the same time, we also need to maintain that neutrality when we are ensuring the relation between two nations which are in conflict. Okay, so and one more thing, that these countries, with these countries we should also collaborate in emerging areas, like what we are doing when it comes to digital public infrastructure, when it comes to fintech, same sort of cooperation should also be there in emerging areas like robotics, like the cyber security. We need to strengthen our relation when it comes to maritime security so that we can effectively counter the piracy which takes place near the Horn of Africa. Okay, so all these steps you can mention. That's how we can improve the relation with the 22 Arab League nations. Now, based on the discussion that we have, I framed a practice question for you people. So, do try this question based on the discussion that we had and let us know your answers. With this, let's move on to the simplified section. Now, beginning with the simplified section, last year, the central government has asked the state governments to give a suggestion that how we can revamp the PM Poshan scheme. So, in that particular respect itself, the state governments and the UT government has given the suggestion to the central government that we should think about increasing or hiking the midday meal workers' wages. This particular topic you can associate with the prelims syllabus, that is government schemes. Okay, now when it comes to the honorarium that is paid to the midday meal cooks and the workers, it is 1,000 per month, and this is provided for 10 months a year. And this cost is also shared between the central government and the states. By this particular fact, you would have understood that this PM Poshan scheme is a centrally sponsored scheme. Okay, now it is up to the state government. If they want, they can give wages beyond this 1,000 rupee itself, but that cost has to be borne by the state government itself. Okay, so this suggestion we have already discussed, that we should hike the wages or the honorarium that is paid to the cooks and the helpers. Other suggestions that were given is, let's enhance the material cost of the meals, keeping in mind the inflation that is increasing. Then it should be extended to the students up to class 12th. Currently it is applicable to students till class 8th. And under the PM Poshan scheme, currently we are providing only one hot cooked meal. Okay. So, the states have also given the suggestion that we should also start providing breakfast also. That would help us in meeting the idea of nutritional security. So, when it comes to this PM Poshan scheme, let's look into the prelim fact related to this particular scheme. So, it is a centrally sponsored scheme, and under this we are providing one hot cooked meal to around 11 crore students which are studying in Bal Vatikas, that is pre-class 1, and to the students till class 8 in government as well as government aided school on all school days from 2021, and this scheme is going to end this particular year, and that is the reason the central government has asked the state government to give their suggestion that how we can revamp the scheme, because the central government anyways is planning to extend this particular scheme. Now, earlier the scheme was actually known by the name of midday meal scheme, and as the scheme by this time you would have understood, the major objective is basically to enhance the nutritional status of school going children, and since we are providing hot cooked meal, this incentivizes the families, especially the poor families, to send their children to school. That way we'll be able to improve the enrollment ratio, attendance, retention, etc. And when it comes to funding pattern, since we studied that it is a centrally sponsored scheme, the funding pattern is 60:40. When it comes to the states and the UTs which have a legislature, 90:10 when it comes to northeastern and Himalayan states, and 100% central funding is there when it comes to UTs without legislature. Now, when it comes to 2024, the government added various additional features when it comes to this particular scheme. So, we included the Bal Vatikas, okay, that is preschool or before class 1, in addition to the children who are between class 1 to class 8. And we also began with Tithi Bhojan, wherein the community would be coming and they would be providing some special food to the children. And remember this thing, that this is going to be in addition to the regular meal. And since the word Tithi itself suggests that this would be on special occasion or on certain festivals. Then we also came up with the idea of nutritional gardens, okay, so that the children get a first-hand experience when it comes to nature and gardening, and we can provide them with fresh fruits and vegetables also. Then we also have the element of social audit to improve the transparency and accountability when it comes to implementation of this particular scheme. Then we also are going in the direction of vocal for local. So the states and the UTs are encouraged to decide the menu which is suitable to the local condition. Okay, you must be aware of this thing, that when it comes to the people living in southern India, they prefer eating rice, as compared to the people who are in Punjab, Haryana region, they prefer eating wheat. Okay, so that is the reason this flexibility should be provided. We cannot go with one size fits all approach, because the dietary habit, the eating habit differs from region to region, and that is what we have taken into account here when we say vocal for local. Then there would be special focus on providing supplementary nutrition in aspirational district, tribal district with identified high case of malnutrition. So we'll be focusing more on such district. Then disaster management, provision of hot cooked meal or food security allowance to the children when the school are closed, okay, so that we don't deteriorate our performance when it comes to nutritional security, when the schools are closed due to disasters. Okay, and when it comes to this particular scheme, it provides for instruction to the schools to procure egg mark quality. So we are not going to compromise with the health of our students. So when it comes to the schools, they are supposed to procure only the egg mark quality, branded items for preparation of meal, training to cook come helpers, and the school management committee has to taste the food before it is served to the children. Okay, that ways we can make sure that there are limited cases of food poisoning, because that was one reason why the midday meal scheme was constantly in news, the bad effect. Okay, that's all that we need to know with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, two more wetlands of India, one from UP, one from Gujarat, has got added into the Ramsar list of wetlands. This particular topic you can associate with the environment section of your prelims syllabus. Now, February 2, that is tomorrow, is celebrated at World's Wetland Day. And on this occasion, we got to know, before this occasion, we got to know that one of the wetland, that is Patna Bird Sanctuary of UP, and the Chari Dhan in Gujarat, they were included in the wetland of international importance, that is the Ramsar Convention. Now, India became a signatory to this particular convention in 1982, and with the addition of these two wetlands, now India's Ramsar network is close to 98 sites. Okay, well, now we will be reading about these sanctuaries in detail, don't worry. Let's first understand certain prelim pointers with respect to Ramsar Convention. So, this international treaty, which is dealing with the conservation and sustainable use of the wetlands, is also known as the Convention on Wetlands, and it was signed in 1971 in the city of Ramsar, which is situated in Iran. So, the place where it was signed, on that city name itself, we have kept the name of this particular convention. And it was on 2nd February that this treaty was signed, and that is the reason the 2nd of February is celebrated as the World Wetland Day every year. When it comes to this treaty, it came into force in 1975, and currently we have 172 parties to this particular treaty. Now, it basically emphasizes upon wise use of the wetlands, basically maintaining the ecological character within the context of sustainable development. One more record is associated with this Ramsar Convention, that is Montreux's record, which basically lists down those wetlands wherein we are witnessing a change in the ecological character, or that change is occurring, or it has already occurred, or it is likely to occur because of technological intervention, human intervention, etc. You need to let me know in the comment section which are the two Ramsar sites which are there in this Montreux's record. Now, when it comes to globally, the first site which was designated under this particular convention was in Australia, okay, that is Cobor Peninsula, and which is the country which has the highest number of Ramsar sites. So, this is your UK, and the next is Mexico. When you talk about the area under Ramsar protection, so it is Bolivia. It has the largest area under Ramsar protection. Let's try and understand about the two sites which got added into this particular Ramsar list. So, we have Patna Bird Sanctuary. So, it is the smallest bird sanctuary. It is merely having the size of 1 square kilometer, and it is situated in the state of UP. Now, you can get a prelims question on this thing. By seeing Patna, you will think that it is situated in Bihar, but it is situated in UP. It was founded in 1991, and when you talk about the flora, it has trees like date palm, peepal, fig, babul, bear, mulberry, shisham, neem, etc. Then if you talk about the fauna, it has golden jackal, jungle cat, fishing cat, Indian fox, common palm, etc. And it is an important, site when it comes to bird also. So, Patna Bird Sanctuary has also been designated as an important bird and biodiversity area by the Bird Life International also. Okay, that is another additional thing that you need to know. Now, coming to Chari Dhan wetland, it is situated in Gujarat, and it is on the edge of Bani grasslands and the run of Kutch. When it comes to the name Chari Dhan, in local Kutchi language, the Shari means salty and Dhan means shallow wetlands. Okay, it is home to endangered species like Oriental darter, black necked stork, Indian skimmer, other bird species like flamingo, common cranes, etc. And it also have chinkara, wolves, desert cats, desert foxes, etc. That's all that we need to know with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, the National Green Tribunal has pulled up the cricket stadiums for using the groundwater, because as per the court order, they were supposed to use treated wastewater and not the groundwater. And additionally, the cricket stadiums, they have not given the required details about their water uses to the Central Groundwater Authority as ordered by the court. And this respect, the NGT has imposed a fine also on the cricket stadiums. This particular topic you can associate with the prelim section of your syllabus. Now, let's understand prelim pointers with respect to the National Green Tribunal. So, it is a statutory body which was created through an act in 2010, and it ensures fast and effective disposal basically related to the case which are dealing with the environmental protection. Then, globally, India is the third country to create such a specialized environmental tribunal after Australia and New Zealand, and we were the first developing country to do so. When it comes to the cases which come before this particular tribunal, it is supposed to dispose of them within 6 months of their file. Now, when it comes to NGT, its principal bench is in New Delhi. It has other 4 benches also in Bhopal, Pune, Kolkata and Chennai. When you talk about its composition, so it has a chairperson, judicial members and expert members. Okay, when it comes to strength, it should be minimum 10 and maximum 20. When it comes to the tenure, the members have a tenure of 3 years or until they attain the age of 65 years, whichever is earlier, and no reappointment is allowed. When it comes to appointment of chairperson, it is appointed by the central government in consultation with the Chief Justice of India. When it comes to appointment of other members, judicial and expert members, they are selected through selection committee which is formed by the central government. Now, when you talk about the powers and jurisdiction of this particular tribunal, so in 2021, Supreme Court has recognized that this particular tribunal has the suo motu powers. Okay, even if nobody has filed a case and NGT knows that, okay, this particular activity is going against the environment, okay, then in that case, the NGT can take necessary action on its own. So, that was recognized by the Supreme Court in 2021 that it has suo motu powers, and it is guided by the principle of natural justice, and these are the 3 core principles, environmental principle, which the NGT is supposed to apply whenever it is dealing with the environment related cases, that is sustainable development, precautionary principle and polluter pays principle. Precautionary principle is if we are doing any activity and we know that it is going to negatively impact the environment, then you should stop that activity. Polluter pays principle, as the name itself suggests, whosoever is polluting, you will be imposing a fine and that person has to pay that cost. Okay, so that we can again rebound, we can restore the ecology again. Then it can order compensation to pollution victims, restoration of damaged property, environmental restoration, and its order are enforced like a civil court degree. When it comes to the decision given by the NGT, if you are not satisfied, then you can go to Supreme Court within 90 days. Okay, from the date the NGT has given the judgment, from that till 90 days you are allowed to go and file a case before the Supreme Court. And these are the laws under which the cases are coming before NGT. Now, based on the discussion, you have to let me know the answer to this particular PYQ. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, in Priya trials which were carried out in Pune, we found that if we increase the B12 intake, it helps us in improving the long-term health of the babies. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 2, issues related to health. Now, what happens is when it comes to B12, it is majorly found in animal-based products, for example, meat, egg, milk, etc. So, it is not present in plant-based product, and that is the reason the vegetarians in India, they have a deficiency of vitamin B12. When it comes to this vitamin B12, it helps in formation of blood cells and the functioning of nerve cells, and its deficiency during the pregnancy especially, it is associated with neurotube defects, okay, that is poor fetal growth and affecting the long-term health as well. Now, when it comes to this deficiency, it is common in India because majority of us are vegan, and this study which was carried out in Pune, it pointed out that if we increase the B12 intake, what happens is it significantly alter the gene expression in cord blood cells, and higher B12 levels surprisingly regulated the expression because it also plays a role in DNA gene expression, and if you add that, that helps us in improving the health of the children. Okay, that is the reason this study, the experts who carried out this study, they suggested that when it comes to B12, it should be a part of the national policies. Now let's understand about this particular vitamin B12 in greater detail. So it is a water soluble vitamin and it is also called as cobalamin. Essential role is it acts as a cofactor in DNA synthesis, formation of red blood cells and maintenance of myelin sheath, which is basically the protective sheet covering your nerves. Your body cannot produce this particular vitamin on its own, so you have to get it from external foods. And as I told you, it is majorly found in animal foods like fish, meat, poultry, egg, milk, etc. It is not present in plant-based foods. That is the reason the people who are vegan or who follow a vegetarian diet, they usually have deficiency of vitamin B12. And when it comes to our body, when we get this B12, it is stored in our liver for 3 to 5 years. So it is up to the body how it is going to use that, and if there is excess B12, it would be excreted through urine. Now usually we see this deficiency in people having vegetarian diets or in people who have undergone a stomach surgery, because in that case their stomach is not able to absorb this essential vitamin even if they are having the animal foods. Okay, and people who have digestive congestion related issues like Crohn's disease, celiac disease, etc. So their body is not able to absorb this vitamin B12 from the food. Now what are the health effects if there is deficiency of this particular vitamin? What would happen? The red blood cells become large and weak and you will constantly feel fatigue and tired. Then it could lead to nerve damage, because as I told you, it plays a major role when it comes to formation of your myelin sheath, which is the protective sheet covering the nerves. So it can cause numbness, tingling, difficulty in walking. Okay. Then mental health problems could also be there. Severe deficiency can cause depression, memory loss, confusion, dementia, and especially this is common among older adults because their body is not able to absorb this particular vitamin from the foods. And then it increases the risk of heart attack also. When it comes to pregnancy, if a woman who is pregnant and the woman does not have this vitamin B12 in adequate quantity, it could lead to birth defects, miscarriages and low birth weight babies. And when it comes to child development, it can also create issues there because it would lead to slow brain development. Okay, and it would reduce the retention and muscle strength. Now don't say that you are not able to focus because your mother did not have B12 in adequate amount or currently you are not having that. If that is the case, please get your B12 supplements. Okay, they are also available in supplement form. Now covering the steps taken by the government. So we have food fortification. Currently the government is ensuring that we are providing fortified rice. Okay, and herein we are fortifying it with B12 also under the PM Poshan and ICDS scheme. Then to address anemia, we have a 6x6x6 strategy wherein we will be focusing upon 6 age groups and we will be providing traditionally iron focused, and here we are also paying emphasis to B12 supplements also. And when it comes to Food Security and Standard Authority of India, it has stated to the food companies that you have to come up with +F logo, which helps the consumer to determine that whether this particular product has B12 as a ingredient in itself or not. Okay, that ways you can manage your B12 intake. That's all that we need to know with respect to this particular topic. Let's move on to the last topic of today's analyst. Now this year the Indian Coast Guard is celebrating its 50 years of its establishment. Okay, so this Coast Guard was established way back in 1977 and currently it is celebrating its 50th raising day. This particular topic you can associate with security defense section of your prelim syllabus. What are the prelim pointers related to this particular body? Let's quickly go through them. So it was established, as I told you, in 1977, but it was formally created, okay, under this particular act, Coast Guard Act of 1978, under the Ministry of Defense. This idea was conceived after the 1971 war. Okay, and its creation recommendation was given by Rustomjee Committee. It is headquartered in New Delhi and it is the 4th largest Coast Guard in the world. When you talk about the maritime zones, it is divided into 5 regions: Northwest, West, East, Northeast, Andaman and Nicobar. What are the functions? Basically to mitigate the effect of maritime accidents, help in ensuring safety, security from natural or man-made disasters, and it also helps the custom authorities to undertake anti-smuggling operations. It helps in the control of marine pollution, especially the oil spills, and it also helps in protection of marine biodiversity. It also plays a major role when it comes to protection of fishermen because we carry out the community interaction programs wherein the Indian Coast Guard conduct regular programs and it make the fishermen aware with respect to that how they can ensure the upkeep and maintenance of their boats and fishing gears. Okay. Then it enforces the maritime laws to which India is a signatory, and it also plays a major role in collection of scientific data. For example, meteorological and oceanographic data which could be used by the scientific fraternity. That's all that we need to know in today's Analyst. Quiz would be coming. So don't forget to practice the quiz and check your knowledge. Till then, keep smiling, keep learning. Have a great day all of you.